All three readings today address the issue of words related to actions. Beginning with our first reading from the book of Deuteronomy, we hear Moses addressing the people of Israel as he proclaims the law that God has given them. This law will be the source of their identity and their life. Moses says other nations will recognize their unique relationship, the relationship Israel has with God, who has chosen them and loves them so deeply. Moses' insistence in Deuteronomy of keeping the law as it has been received and with no additions or omissions is a prohibition against tampering with this most solemn revelation from God. The law is not to be treated lightly, as if it were a mere human invention or social convention. In its concern to protect and safeguard the purity of the law, Israel, after returning from exile some 5 centuries before Christ, began to develop additional laws as a fence around the Torah. These human prescriptions became known as the tradition of the elders and eventually evolved into a code of some 613 additional laws, 248 positive laws, thou shalt, and 365 negative laws, thou shalt not, one for each day. It is this tradition of the elders that is at the center of the confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees in today's gospel. The Pharisees observe that Jesus' disciples are eating their meal without first washing their hands. The custom of hand washing referred to here is not a hygienic practice, but a ritual washing. It probably originated as one of the regulations observed by the priest when they were about to offer sacrifice. By Jesus' time, it seems to have developed into an obligation for everyone. The extension 5 centuries before Christ to the purification of the utensils for preparing the meal and even the dining couch would have been nearly impossible observances for peasant farmers, fishermen, and itinerants like Jesus and his disciples. Given the scarcity of water and their contact with dead fish and other pollutants. This tradition of the elders, as it was called, was likely defined and maintained by urban elites. Jesus warned that it is not external observance of the law that determines one's relationship with God, but a heart that is ever being transformed by divine love, which becomes visible then in concrete actions. Jesus' intent appears not so much to disregard external rules as to focus on internal realities. When Jesus responds to the religious experts challenging him, his central point is that the tradition of the elders is not the center or heart of a relationship with God. The tradition itself is not the problem, but making it absolute and imposing it upon others is. Jesus responds to the Pharisees' challenge about the behavior of his disciples with a quotation directly from the prophet Isaiah addressing them as hypocrites, which comes from the Greek word for actor. Out of the strong Jewish prophetic tradition of self-criticism, Isaiah spoke of religious practices that were on the lips, but not in the heart, as being superficial and an external play acting as true religion. External rituals have value only insofar as they encourage or express the dedication of our hearts. By divorcing tradition from its real intent, we move away from the deeper reality that gives tradition life and meaning. We place more value on what the religious institution creates than the Word of God acting in our lives. We create idols out of practices that can obscure God's work. And this critique applies not just to the Pharisees in today's gospel, but to us Christians through the centuries. How often have we focused on our own agendas and priorities regarding our faith and not on the essence of the message of Jesus Christ? Now, this is not a time for name-calling or passing judgment on others. It is a time to reaffirm the entire Judeo-Christian tradition. Words matter, but putting those words into action fulfills their intent. This brings us to our second reading today from the letter of St. James, a letter that's rarely read at Mass, and a letter that even had a long and difficult time before being accepted into the canon of Christian scriptures. James defines true religion as the formal, and it's the only formal definition of the word religion in the Bible. He says this: it is translating love of God into deeds of loving kindness toward the vulnerable members of the community and putting into practice the work of mercy. He strongly warns us that we must be, quote, doers of the word and not hearers only. James elaborates on how care for the most vulnerable serves as the measuring rod for how well we are putting into action the saving word we hear. It's not enough to experience love within our hearts. That love must find expression in outward deeds. James is a helpful corrective to our tendency to reduce the gospel to a mere system of beliefs or doctrines, or to a matter of personal piety or self-centered spirituality. He calls us to do the work of the kingdom. We don't do this to earn God's love. We don't have to earn God's love because that love has already been graciously given to us. In fact, there's nothing we can do to earn a right relationship with God. Our lives are finally not the result of what we do or not do, but rather the gracious result of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. I tell parents at baptisms that before they do anything else for their child, before they read them Bible stories or teach them their prayers or bring them for their other sacraments or send them to religion class or to a Catholic school, before they do any of that, they are already teaching them the most important thing they will ever learn about God, in that they love Him, they love them, and they love them unconditionally. They don't love the child because of what the child has done, because the infant hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't done any chores. She hasn't brought home a good report card or tidied up their room. They can't do anything. They don't love them for what they do. They love them for who they are. And that's why a mother's love and a father's love is like God's love, because it is totally unconditional. It is to this kind of love that James is calling all of us. He is challenging us to love the tradition and not just simply to perform the ritual. For James, worship is what you do inside the church and outside the church when you do the word. He makes it clear that religion that is pure and undefiled before God is this: to care for widows and orphans in their affliction. In James's time, widows and orphans were on the bottom rung of the social ladder. In our day, this would also include the poor in general, the outcast, the illegal alien, the handicapped, the homeless, and so many others. The task of our discipleship is to transform this world into a place where God reigns. It is a daunting task. But perhaps we can see it as attainable by keeping in mind and trying to live each day the great commandment expressed by the prophet Micah. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.